In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to write equations of circles and how to graph circles. So number one, it says, example one says, write the equation of a circle with center 3, 5, and radius 4. So the general form for the equation of a circle is it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. The center of the circle is hk, and the radius is r. So when we write the equation of the circle, all we have to do is we have to just plug in h for h, k for k, and r for r. So when you're given the center and the radius, it's the easiest example. Okay, so in this problem, 3 is h, so we're going to plug that in for h. 5 is k, so we're going to plug that in for k. And my radius is 4, so we're going to plug that in for r. So using the equation of my circle, the equation of my circle is going to be x minus 3 squared plus y minus 5 equals 4 squared. So here the only thing that we need to simplify is we do need to do 4 squared, which is 16. So the equation of my circle, my final answer, is going to be x minus 3 squared plus y minus 5 squared equals 4 squared is 16. So again, all we did for this problem is we plugged in h for h, we plugged in k for k, and we plugged in r for r. One thing that I think is worthwhile pointing out here is that in the equation of our circle, the center was 3, 5, and when we plug it in, it's a -3 and a -5. And that's because in our form of the equation, it's x minus h, which means it's the opposite of h and the opposite of k. So when we plug it in, it is going to be the opposite signs. So let's take a look at example number 2. So in example number 2, again, we're given the center and the radius. So the center is -5, 9, so that's h and k, and my radius is 2.5. So using the equation of my circle, it's going to be x minus -5 squared plus y minus 9 squared equals 2.5 squared. So all I did was plug in h for h, I plugged in k for k, and I plugged in r for r. When I do plug in a negative number, I do make sure I put it in parentheses just to make sure we don't forget a negative. Okay, so now to simplify this, x minus -5 is just x plus 5 squared. Y minus 9 stays y minus 9 squared. And 2.5 squared is 6.25. So there's our answer. Okay, and just like I pointed out in the previous example, h was negative, but in my final equation, it becomes x plus 5, and k was positive, and it became y minus 9. So it is the opposite signs when we plug it in. Okay, now let's look at how to write the equation of a circle when given a graph. So for these ones, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to identify the center and we're going to want to identify the radius. Once you identify the center and the radius, then you can do what we did in example 1 and number 2 and just plug it in. Okay, so in looking at this example, the center of my circle, if we're counting from the origin, is going to be -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so -5. And then we go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my center is -5, 6. So that gives me h, and that gives me k. Now to find my radius, I'm just going to count from the center out. So 1, 2, 3, my radius is 3. So now I basically have the same information that I had in the previous example. I have my h, I have my k, and I have my r. And now we're just going to use the equation of the circle to plug it in. So it's going to be x minus h, so it's x minus -5 squared plus y minus k, so y minus 6 squared equals my radius squared, so 3 squared. And then simplifying, x minus negative 5 becomes x plus 5 squared. Y minus 6 stays y minus 6. And then 3 squared is 9. Okay, so the only time your parentheses really change is just if there's a double negative, it becomes positive. So there's the equation of my circle. All right, number 4, we're doing the same thing. So first thing we're going to do is identify the center. All right, so the center is right here, and the coordinates of the center is 1, negative 2. The radius, we're going to count from the middle. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my radius is 5. So now I have my h, I have k, and I have r, and now I can just plug it in. So using the basic form of the equation of a circle, it's x minus h, so x minus 1 squared plus y minus k, so y minus negative 2 squared equals my radius squared. All right, to simplify, this just becomes x minus 1 squared plus y plus 2 squared, and 5 squared is 25. Okay, the next example we're going to look at is how to write the equation of a circle when we're given a center and a point. So there's two different ways I'm going to show you how to do these problems. So the first way I'm going to show you is just by using the equation. So here's what we have in this problem. We have our h and we have our k. So if we were just to use this information, our equation of our circle is going to look something like this. It's going to be x minus negative 9 squared plus y minus negative 4 squared equals, we don't have a radius to plug in, so it would just be r squared. So our equation of our circle is going to look something like this: x plus 9 squared plus y plus 4 squared, because remember the signs change, equals r squared. Well, in order to solve for r, what we're going to use is we're going to use this other point. So this other point, I have negative 12, 1. Well, that's just going to be the x and the y. So we're going to plug in negative 12 for x, and we're going to plug in 1 for y, and that will allow us to solve for r, because what we need in order to write the equation of a circle is we need the center and the radius, and we don't know the radius. Okay, so plugging in negative 12 and 1 into my equation, you end up with negative 12 plus 9 squared plus 1 plus 4 squared equals r squared, and now we just need to simplify. So negative 12 plus 9 is negative 3. 1 plus 4 is 5. So it's 9 plus 25 equals r squared. So r squared is 34. So to get my radius, I'm just going to take the square root of both sides. So my radius is square root of 34. Well, now I have my radius. Now I can take this and plug it back into my equation to get the equation of my circle. Okay, so plugging it in, we have x plus 9 squared plus y plus 4 squared. So the equation I'm using is just this one right here. And now we have radius. It's square root of 34. So equals the square root of 34 squared. Okay, to simplify that, it just becomes x plus 9 squared plus y plus 4 squared. And remember, square root of 34, the square root and the exponent basically just cancel out, so you're left with just 34. So there's the equation of my circle. Okay, the next way I'm going to show you how to do this is using something we've done before. It's called stack and count, and then we use Pythagorean theorem. So the reason why this works is because basically all we're doing is finding the distance between the center and the point. If you remember when we first learned about circles, the definition of the radius is the distance between the center and any point on the circle. Well, for these ones, we're given the center and we're given the point. So to solve for the radius, we can just use stack and count and Pythagorean theorem. So to remind you, okay, I'm going to write here, this is stack and count with Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so to use stack and count, what we do is we list out our coordinates. So 15, -7, and 14, -8. And then remember, we count the distance between those numbers. So between 15 and 14, that's just 1. And between -7 and -8, that's just 1. So then we would just use Pythagorean theorem. So it's going to be 1 squared plus 1 squared, and that's going to give us our radius squared. So it's just basically Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, so 1 squared is 1, and 1 squared is 1 is equal to r squared. So r squared is 2. And last step with Pythagorean theorem, we just take the square root of both sides. So my radius is just the square root of 2. So now I have my radius. We're going to plug that in for r. I have h and I have k. We no longer need this point. Now we can plug into the formula for the equation of the circle. So it's x minus h, which is 15, squared, plus y minus k, so -7, squared, equals my radius, which is the square root of 2, squared. Okay, simplifying this is just x minus 15 squared plus y. Y minus -7 becomes y plus 7 squared. And square root of 2 squared just becomes a regular 2 since the square root and the exponent cancel out. Okay, so all I did here is I plugged in h for h, and I plugged in k for k, and I plugged in r for r. So to go over this one more time, to find the radius is just the distance between a center and a point. So one way we found distance is using stack and count with Pythagorean theorem. So we stack our coordinates 15, -7 and 14, -8, and we count the distances between the x values and the distances between the y values. That becomes a and b in Pythagorean theorem. So 1 squared plus 1 squared, it's going to help us find our radius squared. So when we solve for our radius, we get the square root of 2. Once we have that, we can just plug into the equation of the circle, which is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So now we have the equation of our circle. So it doesn't matter which way you choose to do this problem. You can do it the way we did in example 5 by just plugging it into the equation of the circle, or you can use stack and count to solve for your radius and then plugging it back in. In both cases, you do, once you find your radius, have to plug it back into the original equation with both h and k. Okay, the last thing we're going to learn how to do is how to graph a circle given an equation. So example 7, we're given the equation of the circle, and then we need to graph it. So what we basically need to do is we need to extract our h and our k and our radius from the equation, okay? So remember, h is the number that goes with x, k is the number that goes with y, and at the end is r squared. Okay, remember when we plugged in our equation, when we plugged in h and k, the signs switch, which means when we take out h and k, the signs also need to switch. So for this one, the center, since it's x minus 3, that means h is positive 3, and since it's y plus 2, it's -2 for k. So the signs are opposite. So opposite, signs. Okay, to get my radius, we know that r squared is 9 because whatever's over here is r squared. So to get the radius, we're just going to square root this. So we get r is equal to 3. So now I have my center and I have my radius. Now I can go ahead and graph this. Okay, so starting with my center's 3, -2, which is right here. And then to graph my radius, I'm basically just going to go 3 to the right, 3 up, 3 to the left, and 3 down to kind of give me an outline. And I'm just going to connect these into kind of, as best as I can, into a circle. So there's the graph of my circle. Okay, number 8, we're going to do the same thing. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my center. And remember, my center is basically just the opposite of whatever's in my parentheses. H goes with X, K goes with Y. So since it's X plus 3, that means H is negative 3. And since it's Y minus 1, that means K is positive 1. And then my radius, we know that this last number here represents r squared, so r squared is 16. To get my radius, we're just going to take the square root of both sides. So my radius is 4. So now I have my two pieces of information. I'm going to first plot my center. So my center is negative 3, 1, which is right here. And then to plot my radius, I'm just going to go 4 to the right, 4 up, 4 to the left, and 4 down. And this basically gives you kind of an outline to be able to roughly sketch your circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so now for the practice problem. So number 1 says write the equation of the circle, and we're given the center and the radius. So using the equation of my circle, it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So I have h, which I'm going to plug in for h. I have k, which I'm going to plug in for k. And I have r, which I'm going to plug in for r. So using my equation of my circle, I have x minus 6 squared plus y minus 9 squared equals 8 squared. And then the only thing you need to simplify here is just 8 squared is 64. So my final answer should be x minus 6 squared plus y minus 9 squared equals 64. All right, number 5, we're determining the center and the radius, then write the equation for the circle. So in this number 5, there is my center, and the coordinates for the center is 4, negative 2. Since we go right, positive 4, and down 2. And my radius is 1. Actually, it looks like it's 2, but it's actually only 1. From here to here, from 4 to 5, the radius is 1. So using that information, I have h, I have k, and I have r. We're just going to plug it into the same equation. So the equation of my circle is going to be x minus 4 squared plus y minus negative 2 squared equals 1 squared. To simplify here, we just need to simple double negatives and then r squared. So this is just x minus 4 squared. Y minus negative 2 becomes y plus 2 squared, and 1 squared is just 1. All right, now number 9, we're going to identify the center and the radius, and then we're going to sketch the graph, okay? So to get the center, remember it's h and k. H is a number with x, k is a number with y, and remember it's the opposite sign. So here, if we notice, it just says x squared, which really means h is 0, so the x coordinate of my center is 0. And then for k, it's the opposite of the parentheses. So since this says y plus 1, that means k is negative 1. For the radius, remember the number at the end is r squared, so if r squared equals 9, to get r, we just take the square root of both sides. So r is equal to 3. So now using this information, I'm going to plot my circle. So my center is 0, negative 1. And then to get my circle, I'm going to go 3 to the right, 3 up, 3 to the left, and 3 down. And do as best as you can to draw a circle. Okay, number 12. Similar type problem, we're going to get the center and the radius. So the center, h is the one with x, k is the one with y, and then r squared is a number at the end, and it's the opposite side. So since it says x plus 4, that means h is negative 4. And since it says y plus 2, that means k is negative 2. For the radius, r squared is equal to 4. So to get r, take the square root. So r is equal to 2. Now I can plot my circle. -4, -2 is my center. To get my radius, I'm just going to go up 2, right 2, down 2, and left 2. And connect the points to make a circle. All right, number 15. We're going to write the equation of each circle given a center and a point. So since I'm doing 2 problems, I'll do one each way that I taught in the lesson. So I have h and I have k. So using what I know, I'm going to write the equation of my circle. So it's going to be x minus 3 squared plus y minus 16 squared, and we don't know r squared. Okay, so what we're going to do to get r squared is we're going to plug in x for x, and we're going to plug in y for y to solve for r squared, or solve for r. Okay, so plugging in 4 and 15, this becomes 4 minus 3 squared plus 15 minus 16 squared equals r squared. Now we simplify. 4 minus 3 is 1, so 1 squared, and 15 minus 16 is -1. 1 squared is 1, -1 squared is 1, it's r squared. So r squared is equal to 2. Now we just take the square root of both sides, so r is equal to the square root of 2. So now that we have r, we're just going to take that and plug it in our equation of our circle up there. So the equation of our circle is going to be this one right here. So it's going to be x minus 3 squared plus y minus 16 squared equals the square root of 2 squared. Remember, when we square root, the square roots basically just cancel out. And a simplified version is just going to be x minus 3 squared plus y minus 16 squared, and the square root of 2 squared is just 2. All right, so now let me do number 18, but for 18 I'm going to use a stack and count method. Okay, so for 18 we're going to use stack and count to solve for r, since that's just the hypotenuse of the triangle we can draw when we connect the center and a point. So -7, 8, and -6, 11. Okay, we're going to count the distance. So between -7 and -6 is just 1, and between 8 and 11 is 3. So now we just use Pythagorean theorem. This is A, this is B, so it's 1 squared plus 3 squared. That's going to give us our radius squared. So this is 1 plus 9 equals r squared. So r squared is 10. And to get r, we just take the square root. So r is the square root of 10. So now I have my radius, which I'm going to plug in for r, and I have my h, and I have my k. We no longer need this point. We just use that point to find the radius. So now using my equation, x minus h, so x minus -7 squared, plus y minus 8 squared equals the square root of 10 squared. So I just plugged in h for h, I plugged in k for k, and r for r. Okay, so x minus -7 is x plus 7. Y minus 8 squared, and the square root of 10 squared is just 10.